firstly, morning everyone. Welcome to this panel discussion on building a successful recruitment marketing framework. We're keen for this to be interactive, so if you have any questions, pop them into the Q&A section, not the chat, and let me know whether you're happy to be on screen. If you are, I'll promote you to a panelist. If you're not, then I'll just read the question out live for you. Before we kick off, a big thanks to VONQ and Dutch Webshark for helping us make this happen. In case you don't know what they do, here's a little bit about them. So VONQ make talent acquisition teams more successful by helping them create and execute marketing strategies, candidate marketing strategies, through their state-of-the-art technology and consulting services. Working with VONQ allows companies to leverage what they say is one of the world's largest recruitment marketing channel portfolios, which is a mouthful, but I believe them. Machine learning and a free marketing and recruitment analytics platform to promote employer brands and fuel better applications. Dutch Webshark is a data-driven talent pool company that conducts in-depth target group research and keeps you in touch with the right talent for your organisation for now and for the future. So that's the sponsor stuff out the way. Let's do a quick round of intros so you know who we are. Firstly, most of you will know me by now. I'm Alan Walker. I'm a TA and recruitment person by trade, since turned media thingy, whatever that means, and talent technology consulting entrepreneur type. I lead the ChatTalent team, and I also run UDA, the talent tech consulting business I've referred to. I'm probably the least knowledgeable of this panel, though, on recruitment marketing, so it's a good job I'm doing the asking rather than the answering of most of the questions. Next up, Louise, could you introduce yourself? Should be good to go.
So I'm great. It's great to be a part of this panel. For me, this is the first experience, so my first webinar, so I'm really excited. Thank you. At the moment, I'm the head of talent acquisition at Aegon, and I've been started off in market research, product planning, and then went into executive search, working on the corporate side as a recruiter. Started off my own RPO company, so I've worked for companies like Coca-Cola, taking recruitment departments, KPN, so in telecoms as well. Consultant, so assess recruitment functions, and worked for companies like Shell, international corporations like Teva Pharmaceuticals, so in all sorts of branches or industries, and I can bring a few examples to the table of other organizations.
That's perfect. Wonderful. Simon, could you do your quick intro, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Alan. So my name is Simon Rutter, and I'm an employer brand consultant and also an HR communications consultant as well. And until recently, I was the global employer brand director at Takeda Pharmaceuticals, which is a Japanese pharmaceutical company that's truly becoming global, and led the global employer brand activities and implementation there.
Perfect. Theo, over to you.
Hi. So by trade, Alan, I'm an actor, but like many people, I found myself in recruitment. I now work for NICE, the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, and I've come here to head up recruitment. I mainly focus on a recruitment transformation piece, or transformation is too big a word for people to consume, a change project, which is great. But it's come full circle because now I get to do the storytelling, the acting, the writing, as I did earlier in my career as part of kind of the world of employer branding. So kind of come full circle, and it's quite nice.
Okay, excellent. So an interesting mix of people here, definitely. One thing I wanted to do, before we kind of get into some of the nitty-gritty of the how and the what, I wanted to kind of hear your opinions on why getting recruitment marketing right is important. Why can't we just post some jobs on our career site, keep our fingers crossed, and hope the applicants come in? Theo, can we have your view on that first?
Yes, you can. So the world has gone insane. It's gone crazy. Globalization, the ability to communicate across the internet has absolutely exploded. For that reason, the world is so full of information, it's hard for people to kind of understand what's going on, what's true, what's not. There's a lot of double speak, and people are really finding it difficult to understand where the information is that they're going to be interested in connecting is. So kind of that's give us the opportunity as employers, as individuals, to be able to reach out and connect with groups of people with information that's going to be of interest to them. So that's what recruitment marketing is for me. It's getting something of real interest to the right person so that they can experience it, and cutting out the rubbish. It's lifting the blinds and opening the curtains to what life is like within our organisations.
Okay, so it's about kind of, I try and avoid the word authenticity too much, but it is to a certain extent that. It's about delivering the kind of true meaning of what it is to work in an organisation, and kind of cutting through that noise, and trying to make sure that those who decide they want to come and work for you and your company are actually the right people, and vice versa. Equally, you're clearly the right organisation for them. Excellent. Simon, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, I just add that if you're not doing recruitment marketing, then you've managed to spend a lot of money delivering and designing an employer value proposition, so an EVP. You then have built an employer brand off the back of that. But if you're not doing recruitment marketing, then you're not actually realizing the benefits of any of that great work. So you're not actually getting your story out there. You're not really delivering on the promise of EVP and employer branding, which is ultimately to get, as you said, better qualified candidates through the door. But ultimately, from a business perspective, is to do that at a reduced cost and a shorter time to hire. So you're not really delivering the promise and actually implementing and activating the brand if you're not doing recruitment marketing. You're only really doing half the job, if in fact you're probably doing less of it.
Because you're sort of describing the story and telling the story internally and understanding who you are and what you're about, but you're not actually telling anyone about it. And recruitment marketing.
Exactly. So what's the point?
Yeah, exactly.
It's an echo chamber.
Exactly. So there's no point slapping each other on the back and going, aren't we a great organisation to work for, if you're not telling the world about it. Perfect.
Exactly.
Louise.
Yeah, to add, we have so much information at hand to be able to target our audience so much more on a personal level. And really, it's that it ultimately will stay with the company because they join for the right reasons. So that gives us a lot of opportunities to become marketeers. And it is a different trade, I think, that not all recruiters have as an ability, as capabilities, the trade.
Exactly. We are having some sound issues with you, Louise. I think it might be worth you trying to dial in by phone. Leave the video on, but dial in by phone for the audio, because you're kind of popping in and out quite often. And it seems, looking at the chat, it's not just me that's experiencing that. So I think it must be your Wi-Fi connection. So guys, let's move on. Look at some of the what you need to do. And for me, clearly, you need to have a plan. You've got to decide where you're going to head with this. So we look at kind of how you define objectives. Simon, one here for you. We know that data, insights become invaluable to all areas of business. How does that feed into a recruitment marketing strategy?
Well, any recruitment marketing strategy, you should be first looking at the business strategy and then the people strategy. So you should be looking at what are you trying to achieve as a business, then what are you trying to achieve, from the HR perspective to deliver on that business strategy. So you'll have a huge amount of data there already about, business performance, people performance, etc. The capabilities that you need, maybe that you don't have already, and also obviously the capacity. And then what it's about is saying, okay, from that, what data do we have here that's really telling a story in terms of our current recruitment marketing process? So, do we actually have a recruitment marketing process in place? If we don't, then let's take a step back and look at how we're going to build an employer value proposition and an employer brand. So that's about looking at, okay, for example, what is our current cost per hire? What is our current time to hire? What are things like our attrition rates? What are our retention rates? You can look at things like employee engagement surveys, which will tell you a lot about, why are people, for example, staying with the company, but also look at exit interviews, so why are they leaving and where they're going. You can get a huge amount of that internally. You can also get a huge amount of that from external data sources as well. LinkedIn, for example, is very good at that, but there are other providers as well. So it's really looking at what are you trying ultimately to achieve as a business, then what data do you currently have, where do you then have maybe some gaps that you need to fill in terms of your data, looking at where you can possibly get those. And that's, that's a pan, that's not just talent acquisition, that also sits more broadly with HR. And then saying, okay, what are we going to do? So is it something where we need to go right back to basics and develop an EVP and an employer brand and then work out the recruitment marketing strategy from that? Or have we got something that's recruitment marketing at the moment, but it needs to be tweaked, it needs to be changed, it needs to be possibly, in the case of Theo, they're transformed because it's not ultimately delivering what the business or the people strategy is, because that might have changed in the meantime. But there's a huge amount of data out there, but it's about being really clear. What are you trying to achieve as a business? What are therefore you trying to achieve from a people aspect? And then where are you in terms of your employer brand and in terms of your recruitment marketing?
Excellent. Theo, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think Simon covered most things off there. What I would say is when you walk into an organisation and you struggle to be able to access some of that information, from a recruiter's perspective, sometimes you can just look at the last 12 months. You can look at where the pain points are. You can look at your singular world. So if you're focusing on the digital department, then what are the likely plans for that department for the next 12 months? And then that's how you as an individual can actually impact on the overall objectives. So, certain organisations won't have a well-structured plan and won't thought about talent acquisition or the people element. So that's where you can still get in and help by looking at the past 12 months to inform the next 12 months.
So it's kind of about putting in place those clear objectives is pretty obvious then, isn't it? It's about where are we now, kind of assessing that piece first and understanding what works, what doesn't, and where do we want to get to before we then put together the plan to actually get to that point. One area I know many struggle with is actually understanding who they want to communicate with and how to communicate with them. So let's say we've done that whole piece of work around understanding our objectives, understanding what we want to achieve. What do we need to do to make sure we target the right people in the right way? Theo?
So this is interesting for me because it falls back to my executive search days and the amount of research that you put into a given project. So, I would always start with utilising the technology at hand that I'm used to, like LinkedIn. You can look, what I've done at NICE is actually looked at where our employees were previously. Sometimes you can get this from your ATS system or there's finance data, or you can find it in other places in the organisation. But ultimately, that data, that information starts to build the story. You can then look at building personas through Q&A. So I've done it for 2 different departments here, for our economists, health economists that we struggle with, and actually for our digital department. And I've done it in 2 ways. I've done it via a SurveyMonkey, which was really complex with lots of different questions. What I would suggest here is be careful about having too many open-ended questions, because 2 months in, I'm still trying to make sense of that data. And the other way I did it with our health economists and our researchers is actually I just got a Word doc and I got 7 questions. I kept it very simple. I found that really easy to make sense of. So dependent on what you're looking at, if you're focusing on a global organisation, you need a more robust, structured approach. However, if you're a recruiter and you're just looking at ways to research your department, then clearly you can just use a Word document and start share that around and see what information you get back. The other areas are working groups, one-to-ones, sitting down with people in the team, getting an individual to talk around some of the things that interest them. And you're just building on all this evidence and information. Externally, that's all internally. Externally, you can use platforms like Jobs to Words, Horsefly, LinkedIn, Google Analytics, Indeed now have some analytics around job titles, stuff like that. All of this stuff you can utilize to build the evidence and information analysis that you need to then move forwards and start to target the right people.
And as well as targeting the right people, Simon, I don't know whether you have an opinion on this, as well as targeting the right people, how about knowing where to target them? So how to communicate to them and through which channels?
Yeah, so again, I think that comes back to the, looking at the persona. So the persona work that Theo just talked about there, which I totally agree with, is really important, because what that will tell you, if it's really good persona work, is actually what channels do these people hang out on. So while there is a hygiene element to your LinkedIn profile, your other social platforms, Twitter, Instagram, whatever you're on, and obviously your careers site, now you may have a separate careers website, or you may have a careers section on your existing corporate website. It's also about looking at where are those people. So, for example, one of the research pieces that I've been involved in was looking at data scientists. Now, everyone's talking about data scientists at the moment, but actually, when you look at it, a lot of these data scientists, they're not on LinkedIn, right? They're not hanging around in places on the internet that are easily findable. So, searchable, I should say. So, actually, what was a good thing that we did there was actually running a hackathon. Because what we discovered was that actually data scientists love to get involved in things. They love things that are tangible. They like competition. They like to actually, it's not necessarily about getting a job at the end. They like to show off their skills. They like to collaborate. They like to, just work on something different. So that's something where you can, again, be informed by the persona work and then be choosing the channel that's appropriate. And it doesn't necessarily always have to be digital. They might not be on traditional sources of hires. They might actually be, hanging out on forums, on specialist websites, and you can post things there and just say, come along to this event. You can even start to get a little bit of a preview, a trailer, and kind of, to nurture people along. I know we're going to talk about nurturing later, but it comes back to that persona work. Where are these people hanging out? And maybe they are hanging out on LinkedIn, and that's great. And then you start to look at your content strategy and calendar for that. But a lot of people these days are, if I look at, for example, when I worked in pharmaceuticals, they're not really on LinkedIn. They're not hanging around on Indeed. They are, they're in demand, but they don't need to move, right? And they're very passive. So it's more about looking at, okay, what's our event schedule? What events do we speak at? Where are these people? How can we start to engage with them in some sort of conversation? What people do they know that we could maybe get an introduction to them via? So it's about being creative with where are those people hanging out, and really looking at the research and data. And all of that links back to what Theo said, which was the persona work.
I think that's a really good point there about, the internet, the web, technology, however you want to refer to it, isn't necessarily the golden bullet to everything here. And some of those physical events, those in-person things such as meetups, organised conferences that you do yourself rather than necessarily attending a mass one where there's thousands of delegates. There's a nice tight group about a particular topic that you guys have got a challenge around that you want to tackle, and you bring together lots of experts to discuss that. It can be a really good way of targeting very specific individuals and kind of positioning yourself as showing them that you find that stuff important. And therefore, if you find it important, they find it important, maybe that is a good match.
Yeah, it's about positioning yourself as a thought leader, or as somebody who's doing something a little bit different in that space, rather than just posting a job ad and posting and praying. It's actually what we want to engage people in an activity. And then that's a great opportunity for you to control that environment and talk about and reflect your employer brand, but in the context of something that they're actually interested in, that they're actually going to be doing. It's much more tangible. It's much more real, because I'm not going to use the word authentic today, Alan.
Yeah, we decided at the beginning of this we were going to have a buzzword bingo, and I used authentic words first, just to let you guys
You've done it.
Louise, is there anything you wanted to add on targeting and how you actually reach out to the right people?
Yeah, looking at targeting, one of the researchers that we did at Aegon, inspired by McKinsey, was that we actually started listening really good at also the employees that we already have in-house. So we assessed our high performers and compared them, had them do some testing, and really looked at the specific traits that differentiated them from the other and less highly performing employees. And really boiling it down, so we were taking out the human failure element of our assessments, but also some interesting things came out. That it turned out that, and we were looking at call center employees here, some pre-assumptions that we had in targeting the audience were different, so we could actually target a broader audience, knowing what the traits were that actually made them successful. So instead of going towards the standard groups, we also looked at people that were maybe a bit more experienced or came from other industries and different roles. So that made it really successful. And then again, it's all about targeting that audience again, using their language, their interests, and so it's a lot of listening going on there and staying curious and making sure that the biases that you have, that you take them out, and then target your communication a bit better and make it more a one-to-one marketing thing. And what I think is also very important, that you actually show your face. So video content, storytelling, actually walking around your company and showing them what is done on a day-to-day basis. It brings along a much more honest story. And if people are attracted to that, they're attracted to what they'll actually see in day-to-day life once they come in. So what we are seeing is that there's people that perform better, but they also have much more fun. So there's less sickness and there's less retention. So in the end, that boils down to reduced costs as well and a high performing organization. So I think that's an interesting area as well.
No, absolutely. I really like that point around kind of understanding the fit of an individual, not based necessarily purely on background, experience, and kind of relevance. Have they worked for a competitor? Have they done the same role? But bringing the whole traits, behaviours, skill set, etc., into the mix and broadening the catchment and having a much deeper pool that you can fish from. I think that makes absolute sense, and it gives you probably leads to more diversity of thought, ideas, creativity as well, because you're not always fishing from that same shallow pool that your competitors are just moving people around. It gives you some better ideas, and potentially that leads to competitive advantage. Absolutely. So we've understand our objectives, what we want to achieve. We've researched the audience, and we kind of know how to get out and contact them. We know who we're targeting, and we think we can target the right people in the right way. The next thing that comes along in my mind, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is kind of producing the content that lets us engage with those individuals. And from my experience, although I'm a wee bit rusty, it's 4 or 5 years since I led a TA team now, possibly longer, some of the team I was leading would say. But we always struggled with actually producing that interesting content that was targeted. It felt like it was something personal to the individuals who we were targeting by function, by sector, by level, whatever it might be. And it felt like a whole heap of really hard work just producing that content. Have you got any ideas around that, Simon, in terms of certainly how do we get the kind of basics right, but how can we tackle that production of good quality content for people?
Types of content, Alan. So I think there is what you mentioned there, which is the really informative, useful, relevant content that tries to feel personal and that helps candidates and touches on and resonates on a particular issue that a lot of them are concerned with. So say, for example, like career progression. Okay. But I think there's also a place for just entertaining content as well, that just kind of showcases what you guys are all about in a really real way. So I think if I take those separately, so the first one, which is the more informative, relevant content, that does take time to produce. That there's no way around that, because what you're trying to add is massive value to somebody that is a candidate, whether they're passive or active. But one of the things that I think often TA teams or HR teams or recruiting, resourcing, whatever it may be, they get stuck in thinking that they have to create all that content. And obviously, as we've discussed many times before, a lot of TA people, they're not content specialists, they're not marketeers, right? They're recruiters, they're resources. So it's about looking at which people can I partner with to create this content. So for example, if you wanted to do, let's say, a short white paper on career progression in X industry, why don't you just pick 2 or 3 of your best and more amenable hiring managers to help you with that? Can you do a short interview with them? Can you record it? Maybe you can even do it as a quick video shot on an iPhone. It doesn't have to be produced and polished. Can you, for example, interview a couple of senior leaders, or maybe not the CEO, but people like lower down, but who can talk to how they've made their way through the organisation in a way that, you know, it feels, you know, it's not all well lit and, you know, perfectly scripted, but just feels really natural. Now, in order to do that, I think a lot of times it's not just HR hiring managers. Also, can you work with your corporate communications team? Can you leverage either work that they're already doing? Can you get them to maybe help you support with some of the filming? So, just checking your scripts, just making sure that there's alignment on key messages. So it's things like that from that sort of high quality but low volume content that you're not going to create tons of. You're going to maybe do 2 or 3 a year, but it adds massive value, and there's a clear call to action. You know, if you like this, sign up to our emailing list or whatever it is. So I think it's just looking at what assets and resources and people are there already in the business and going and talking to them. And people don't want great polished content these days. As we know, it doesn't have to be a production factory. So you don't need to get het up on, does every word need to be perfect? Does it, you know, as long as the theme and the sentiment comes across, that's what resonates with candidates. The other point of content is, as I said, entertaining. So just showing your real colours. You know, some great companies out there, you know, Indeed is one, for example, that are really good at this. It's showing what life is like at Indeed. And that's just really, you know, it's high volume content. They're pumping out stuff regularly on their social channels, on their careers, on their websites as well. But it's stuff where, again, can you, for example, work with content that's already being produced? So your corporate communications team, for example, they might be producing content, videos, whatever it may be, around internal events, around sports events, well-being, training, all of those things. Can you, you know, tag along? Can you repurpose? Can you interview the same people, but just do it from a slightly different angle in terms of one that reflects your employer brand? And again, maybe just get some help from corporate comms or hiring managers to make sure, does that really reflect who we are trying to target in the language that they use? But look at because a lot of organizations are content engines. It's just the content creation, production and syndication is siloed. So, you know, going and having conversations with corporate communications, explaining what you're trying to do. CSR is another great area. A lot of content that comes out of corporate social responsibility teams it can be quite dry, it can be quite corporate. Can you repurpose that to show what you do as an employer brand? Can that be one of your proof points to your EVP? You know, just take some nice pictures, couple of lines on a social post. Doesn't have to be a call to action. You know, you can. It's just about raising awareness of what you do as an employer and why you do it, and then you follow up with, as you said earlier, that more kind of targeted, relevant, useful content that is harder to produce. But you know, you can't be pumping that out every day, but then takes people through the funnel from that kind of awareness stage to really actioning and, you know, actually saying, actually, I'm seriously considering working for that company. So I know it's a bit of a long answer, but I think that it's important that those two types of content work hand in hand, and there's a mix. If you have too much content that's just awareness, then you're never moving people to actually apply for jobs. But if there's too much high quality content, it's very hard to produce. It can take time, and you know it's very much right. Apply for a job. You know, there's a clear call to action, and people haven't warmed up to you. They don't really understand what you are and why you do what you do. So social media, careers postings are really good ways of doing that. So you need a good mix of both of those content, and you can do that cheaply, and you can do it relatively smoothly if you engage those teams, particularly corp comms, but also your hiring managers. That, you know, it's a great way of getting them involved.
I guess that goes because it's a funnel ultimately, isn't it? It's the marketing funnel, and the awareness bit is the widest part of the funnel, right at the top, where you want to be in essence putting most people into. And the content there is probably going to be the greatest in terms of the amount of content you're putting out, and it probably needs to be the less polished in a way, because it can be stuff that's done by your own, your own team, your employees, hiring managers, people who've been successful, enjoy working there, whoever that might be. You want to be reasonably loose on the reins, I'm assuming now, in most organisations, but I'm sure there are some corporates that are still ultra tight on, it's got to be bang on message, it's got to be polished, it's got to be super branded in exactly the way we brand everything else. But I find that smaller companies can be much more agile, and they see the advantages of that without necessarily having the massive scale or the big budgets.
Yeah, absolutely, and you see it all the time. And it certainly, I've mostly worked in big, complex global organisations, so it can be a challenge. But it's definitely about, you know, you're very clear with your corporate communications teams, talent acquisition, resourcing, HR, about what you're doing and why. you can take data as well to prove your case, then I think it's easier sometimes to be able to be a bit more nimble. But it's definitely a challenge. But definitely, you know, all the data sources point to the fact that candidates are not interested in those big corporate, you know, polished videos. They're not interested in huge, you know, messages from the CEO. They want to know from people that are doing the job they're doing, or that are hiring them for the job that they're doing. So yeah, the less, I don't want to say polished, but yeah, the more real it can feel, and the more immediate and the more relevant, and I think the more likely it is to be successful.
You did very well to avoid the word authentic there, Simon. Well done.
I'm still going. One halfway through.
Louise, anything to add?
No, really agree with Simon, and it's, I think one of the challenges of the recruiters is that we actually start engaging those employees, and there's always a few that are a bit better with content creation and don't mind to be videoed. So it's getting that those first ones to be the champions. And I think it's also, it stimulates people to actually think about who are we as a team, and they become more proud of who they are and want to share it. But making it okay to be less polished is something that needs to be stimulated by leadership. Maybe even vlogging as an example does help. But it's not easy in all cultures and all organizations to get that started. But maybe start with the young ones and focus on graduates, and they'll get things moving. Yeah.
Instead of as old gits. Perfect. Theo, anything to add?
Two quick things. One, Stan at VONQ has written something recently that there's some data information in there that shows around 50% of candidates, or approximately that, say that they want to hear from the hiring manager. So whatever you're doing, if you can get the hiring manager or somebody within that department to communicate in some way, shape or form, that's going to be powerful. It's tough, but if you can do it, that's going to make the difference. Video, blogs written, whatever, just so that somebody can get a sense of the individual. Sometimes it can just be around getting them to update their LinkedIn profile, which we've done here. So actually, people can just go and look at the LinkedIn profile and get a better sense of who they're going to be working with. The other thing is, I was listening to a podcast, Link Humans, some time ago, with Sean Zilich, ex-employer branding leader at GE. So GE, largest American conglomerate in the world. For the first 4 years, I think she said she didn't have any real budget to support her in what she was trying to achieve. So what I would urge people to think about is you can make it happen, and you can make it happen on a shoestring, and you can find other ways to fund your effort. So here it's underspend. It's finding where different departments have not spent money and where we can tap into that. So you don't need to create it all on your own. It doesn't need to be your own budget. You've got to find a way to influence people, to get them bought in, to support you in your endeavours.
I think that's really important there about kind of getting creative with other budgets, because this stuff doesn't need to cost a fortune. I think it's also important to understand that any branding, marketing efforts don't just benefit necessarily the recruitment team, they benefit the whole business, and vice versa. Just because something might be seen as corporate branding or corporate marketing, it's still getting the message out there about the organisation, raising awareness of that organisation, and in theory, talking about some of the good stuff that they do. We've had a question from Sam Monteith, who wants to know how do you know that this stuff's going to work? So you talk about investment in content. It's not always about cash, but it most certainly will be time and people, etc., often with busy people. How can you be confident that you're going to get a return on investment? How can you know it's going to work? Who wants to answer that? Simon, you're smiling. I'm going to put that one on you.
Thanks, Alan. I'm smiling because, you never know anything is going to work, right? I mean, you can never be sure of that in any element of business strategy, in any project or program. I think that what I'd say in this is that I've never seen, working with different companies, an employer brand and EVP project that hasn't delivered something in terms of reduced cost to hire, reduced time to hire, and some sort of improvement in brand awareness, brand reputation, and ultimately fewer candidates, but better qualified candidates. Now, it might not have been to the extent that maybe the company would have wanted and maybe thought they might achieve, but then you can always look at project scope and what's actually realistic metrics. It's also important to understand where you started from. But as I say, I've never worked with a company where this hasn't moved the needle at least a little bit. And just to pick up on your point there around corporate branding, if you read, for example, the Edelman Trust Barometer that comes out every year, trust in organisations has never been lower. I mean, it's at rock bottom. Nobody trusts anybody. They don't trust anything that comes out of corporations, companies, anything. Employer branding is still an area where companies do have an element of control, where there is still a little bit of trust, but generally that's because the content is seen as being created by the people that are within the organisation. It's not necessarily always the higher levels, and it is seen as more real content. So what you can actually do with employer branding as well, it's not just the metrics that I mentioned there, but it's also looking at what is our corporate reputation, where was that, and how can we track where it's gone to. And where I've worked on employer brand projects that have been successful, they have always improved the corporate reputation as well. And I think that's an important point, because overall, as I say, corporate reputations and corporate branding are plummeting every single year because of trust in organisations. The other thing to think about as well is employee engagement. I've said for a long time, actually, employee engagement, again, like trust, has been at rock bottom levels in most organisations for 20 years, and the needle hasn't really moved on it. Now it's been kind of rebranded as employee experience, and hoping that now it's got a more holistic angle to it, we'll start to see more movement on it. But the point is, if you can get a really strong employer brand, I do believe that actually, as Julia's point earlier, you can make your people prouder to work in the organisation. You can make them really understand why it is that they come to work, why it is that they stay, and why it is that they would encourage their friends and family to work for that company as well. So you can actually get improved engagement and therefore improved productivity and improved happiness and well-being as a result of the employer brand. So it's important not to just box the metrics into the traditional talent acquisition ones or resourcing ones. It's also important to think this more broadly in terms of corporate reputation, corporate branding, and employee engagement and communication. So you need to think about it more holistically, because then I think you're going to be able to pinpoint more areas of success rather than just saying, did we get more candidates through at a lower cost? Did we reduce our agency spend? Which is generally where the conversation starts. I think it's our job to actually broaden the minds of these stakeholders and actually show them the multitude of benefits that really good EVP, employer branding, well thought out projects and delivery can really deliver.
But it's also important to remember that an employer brand isn't something you write down. It's a living, breathing embodiment of what it's like to actually work at an organisation that encompasses the EVP, the culture, the people, and everything around it. And your job as recruitment marketeers and employer brand experts is to actually get out there and celebrate the good stuff about your organisation, and maybe be reasonably honest about the stuff that doesn't work. And you're working on it, you've recognised it, you're going to improve those areas, because that goes a long way. Rather than just go out and say, yes, we're the best organisation in the world, come and work for us. People won't believe that anymore. As you say, that trust element isn't there. Even if it might be true, people aren't going to believe you. They want to hear that warts and all to a certain extent. And again, bringing hiring managers and other members of the team into the mix ensures you can, to a certain extent, deliver that more honest, trustful message. Perfect. So we've nailed the objectives, research, created some awesome content. How do we get it out there? It's a really complex area. There's so many channels that people can use and so many different ways of delivering content to people, be it social or email or career site or whatever. What are the basics that people need to have covered off, Simon?
I think for me, the basic, like you said, there's a lot of channels out there that you could use. I think the basic ones for hygiene factors. So let me take a step back. I'm currently interviewing and looking at companies at the moment. As part of my research, I'm definitely going to be looking at your careers website. So whether that's a separate standalone website or your careers site. I'm going to be looking at your social platforms, LinkedIn, Twitter, Instagram, whatever it may be. I'm going to be looking at Glassdoor. I'm going to be looking at Indeed. So I'm going to stick to those to give me, there'll be some patterns and trends that come out of those. So those at a hygiene level need to be really, really good. And what I mean by really good is they need to be at the very level, they need to be consistent with your employer brand. So they need to be making, they need to be resonant and reflective of that employer brand. They need to be consistent across them. So it needs to be telling a consistent story wherever I look. There needs to be a regular flow of content on these channels, because that to me says, actually, we take this seriously. We are really serious about our EVP and our employer brand. We want to show you as candidates what it's like to work here. And a good, as I said earlier, linking that, a good mix of content. So not everything has to be really high quality call to action. Actually, just show me some cool stuff that's happening at your company. Some great stuff that your employees are involved in, that they're proud about, and that they want to shout about. But I'm going to be looking at those core channels, because they are absolutely essential. I'm going to be looking as well at, are you talking to Glassdoor, are you proactively managing your Glassdoor presence, or are you just letting other people own that for you, and therefore you're just in this unfettered field of comments and people that are probably not particularly happy with how they found their employee experience at your company. So are you managing proactively those channels that you can? Are you managing your presence on Indeed as well? So I'm going to be looking at those both from what are people saying about you, but also what are you saying about yourselves? How proactive are you managing that? How regularly are you putting out the content? Is it consistent? Does it resonate with me? Is it useful? Is it a good mix? Because all of those things send powerful messages to me about what you value as an organization. Because if you're not putting content out and it's not consistent, then it says to me that you don't really care about employer branding, even if you might have said you do. So those are the key ones that for me are at a hygiene level before you start going into job boards and specialist areas that we discussed earlier. But those ones for me as a job seeker at the moment, when I'm looking around, they are, if those aren't right, then there's a lot of alarm bells ringing for me already.
Excellent. Thanks, Simon. Louise, anything to add to that in terms of what are the basics you need to cover, and maybe then thinking some more of the creative channels that you can utilize?
Yes. Well, looking at the most important channel, I think it's making sure that you have your referral program up to speed, and that all employees are part of your recruitment team, and they know exactly where to go to, because they're active in their networks. And if they're not active, then I think it's part of our role as a recruiter to make sure that they become more active and start sharing stories with people in their network. And sharing those stories, they can use the content that has already been created. So once that becomes livelier and they start liking it and sharing it, then there'll be a lot of buzz coming around our organization, and it doesn't become a recruitment thing anymore. It's just being them out there and active, and then automatically having in the back mind that once they come across really good people, they'd love to bring them in our fantastic organization. So it becomes more of a natural thing. But yeah, we need to get that started first. And I think it's something that will become second nature in a few years' time. We're much more socially active than we're now.
And is there a way is there technology or tools that you can use to help activate that workforce? So in a smaller organisation, it's relatively easy. You go and tap someone on the shoulder and say, do you know anyone? But actually in a much larger, complex organisation, like the one you work for, Louise, how can you scale that out and make it easy for employees to get behind recruitment and employer branding efforts and start to leverage their networks?
Yeah, that's one of my priority areas I want to dive into, because there are some great referral tools out there. And in the past, it was a tool where the program was stimulated and you'd get bonus points for sharing the information, or only at the end, once somebody was hired, you'd get a bonus. But now it's much more of a sort of sharing platform where communications can come in and start making sure that there is content to share, and informing targeted groups to say, okay, we have something here in marketing now. Can you tap into your networks? Who are your networks? And helping them in their thinking to get that content out to the right targeted audience. And I think, yeah.
Sorry, carry on.
So Yes, technology is starting to help us to really make things much more easy. Just sitting in the train, going to work, it will become even a fun thing to do. Just going into your app and sharing the latest news that you found of your organization, or maybe share the other way around, share some things out of your network into your organization as examples of best practices. And again, as long as it's a bit more fun, then it's only it shouldn't be all too serious. Then it becomes easier to do.
Absolutely. I've seen some really cool kind of gamified referral platforms where the content's fed to the employees and then they're awarded based on shares and likes and how much they're putting out stuff through their social channels. But even on a really basic level, for companies who can't necessarily afford that kind of investment, a simple WhatsApp group of all your employees that you can just push content out to them and say, share this, get on this, get behind this, here's an idea of something you might want to share today. That's pretty much zero cost. But you can actually leverage a fairly big audience. So there's limits on the size of a WhatsApp group. You can always have one by department, by function, by team. Or when you've got something you think is relevant to them, whether it's your marketing guys, your sales guys, your tech guys, shoot stuff out. It's basic, but it's simple. And I've seen it be very, very effective. But you can have the cool kind of corporate level enterprise tools as well. Excellent. Theo, anything else you wanted to add on that point?
No, not really. I mean, it's just the importance of job descriptions and getting that content out in the simple places where sometimes you miss. Whether it's your advert here at NICE, we just changed some of the wording. Obviously there's providers out there that can help you with thinking around better wording, whether you're looking at diversity or whether you just want to increase applicants from a certain group or people who think in a certain way, for instance. So a simple thing that we did is our economists are called technical analysts. Well, technical analysts also exist in the digital world. We were getting too many applicants from the wrong space. So just around changing that first line of the job advert, so it said, are you a health economist or health researcher? And then you follow on. So, sometimes it's around getting the content right, knowing where you're going to put it, and just looking for the simple things first of all and measure those before running off and changing the whole piece.
Let's cover off one more area and then we'll go to questions from the audience. So let's assume, Theo, we've done all the cool stuff around raising awareness of our brand. We've got people interested in us. They are aware of our existence. How do we convert that awareness into people actually applying for the roles that we eventually put in front of them?
So where I've done...
Oh, we seem to have lost Theo. Simon, do you want to answer that one?
Can you repeat the question, Alan? Sorry.
Yeah, so we've done a whole heap of stuff around awareness, getting people interested in our brand, and maybe the idea of working for us is something that's sitting there maybe in the back of their mind. How do we convert those people into actual applicants?
Well, I think it's looking at, when I talked about earlier about, high quality content, can you, for example, put calls to action on there? So you're putting, you're capturing people's email data so that you're able to then email market them more effectively. So you can put out job descriptions, you can put out your latest events, etc., directly to people that have expressed an interest in your company and in your content. So that's one way that you can do that. I think also you can invite people, for example, to open days. You can invite people to, keep them updated on events that you're going to be speaking or presenting at. That is another way of doing it. But also you can think about how can we start, those people that have expressed some sort of interest, can we, go for an informal coffee chat with them? Can we have a LinkedIn email with them? How can we start to at least move that conversation on? So we're really having a conversation with them either offline or online. So there are various ways of doing that. As I said, you can either go and meet them face to face, one to one, or you can go and do that in a group setting. Maybe you have an activity, maybe you have some sort of themed event, whatever that may be. or it's about just say nurturing that email distribution list that you're getting, that you're capturing through the high quality content that you put out. So there are various ways of doing it, and obviously, as Julia said, keep making sure that you're keeping that momentum going on your referral program, and that you're capturing that data, and that you're speaking directly to those people, even if they might not be a good fit for you right now. You're keeping them kind of ready and warm, so that when they, when maybe a suitable position does come up, you can move them through the funnel and have a conversation about a specific role posting. So there's lots of things you can do. A lot of that you can automate in your ATS now as well. You should be, with the data that you're capturing on candidates, you should be then looking at it and thinking, okay, maybe they're not the one for us right now, but maybe they could be in the future. And you're looking at talent pools, talent pipelines. You can do something very straightforward on pretty much every careers website now, where you can sign up for job alerts. People that do that, you should be looking at them, you should be nurturing them, you should be moving them along. You should certainly be having regular checkpoints with your talent acquisition team. So, okay, roles come up. Did we have anyone that wasn't successful last time? Do we have anyone that signed up for job alerts in this area? Do we know people, are hiring managers that, do they have people in their network that they could activate as well? So there's lots of different ways that you can do this. There's no one sort of single solution. There's lots of different ways that need to be sewn together. So you're taking people who have actively shown an interest in your company, and you're, as you say, nurturing them more and engaging with them on a more direct level, for actually hopefully they will consider joining your company.
Yeah, maybe I can add on that one. So I have great experiences with that nurturing part, and really diving into the candidates in that talent community that has good potential to be able to start in the organization. And it's also an act of getting that window of opportunity, enlarging it from the candidate side, having a discussion, not are you interested in this specific role now, but where are you in your career, and what motivates you, and would you be interested just to look into our organization and to get to know our organization, and then start really listening and understanding where opportunities could be. And then on the other hand, as a recruiter, you sometimes can get really frustrated because you have that fantastic candidate, but there's not a job opening. So from the business side, we're also looking at opportunities to bring in those really scarce candidates into projects, or even being able to hire them even before there's a requisition, and taking that risk of maybe having them 3 months earlier on board, and where there's actually a real role for them. So it's becoming a bit more creative and engaging, and creating that bigger window of opportunity.
Perfect, excellent. Listen, guys, I don't know what's happened to Theo. I have worries about his safety now, having completely disappeared from the call. Hopefully he'll get back. I'm assuming battery has died or something along those lines. And we've got some questions from some of the audience here. Gemma Parker has been very brave and said she's willing to come on and ask the question live. So I'm going to try something I've not tried before. So we'll see if this works. So Gemma, bear with us. So it should appear. Let's hope. Here she is. Gemma, you're on.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello.
Oh, there we go. Hello.
Yes, it did work, thank goodness. It was just, I was kind of asking, from a kind of marketing perspective, if you have a marketing team who obviously are creating content and it's very much in line with EVP and corporate brand, but you're trying to engage with the talent pools that you've built and created over kind of a number of months, I suppose it's how do we get marketing on board with the kind of communication that we want to send, so it's a bit more casual, it's not necessarily all super branded. Is there a way to try and get the marketing team behind what we're doing, and maybe help them understand why it's not going to be maybe all absolutely super branded and super corporate, and it's more about actually trying to build relationships with the candidates?
So Simon, Louise, have you got a response to that?
Yeah, I've dealt with this a lot, Gemma. I think one of the key things you mentioned there about helping them to understand, there's a lot of stakeholder engagement and listening that needs to go on, particularly with marketing. They do come generally from a more corporate brand perspective, so or consumer brand, customer brand, whatever it may be. So it's really taking data to them, explaining to them what an employer brand is, what its specific purpose is. I mentioned earlier about how it can also help them as well. So showing what's in it for them, it can help. It does have a halo effect ultimately on the consumer brand and the corporate brand, because obviously people have a bad candidate experience, then they may not be a customer of yours, and they'll certainly tell other people about that experience. So it's a lot of explaining, a lot of patience, a lot of data. One of the things that I found really useful is taking stuff that our competitors have done. Because marketeers are generally competitive as well. So if you show what your competition are doing, show, for example, rather than just saying content doesn't have to be polished, actually showing what that content then looks like, so they can kind of be a little bit more comfortable with what you're actually presenting, feels a bit more real and tangible. Then I think that can help somebody. But it does take time. It does take patience. It took me and still, every organisation that I consult with or that I've worked in has had that same challenge. So you're not alone. It is a big one, whether it's sometimes it's marketing, sometimes it's corporate comms and branding, whoever it may be. Employer branding, we have to bear in mind, is a fairly new concept for a lot of organisations. So there is a certain level of we have to take them on that journey, and part of that is data, part of it's listening and showing what's in it for them as well.
Yeah, the content they produce is amazing, but it's just, as you say, sometimes it can take a bit longer to produce and maybe want to communicate more frequently. So that's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, can you take their big content that's produced and chunk it down into smaller digestible bites? Something like that. Can you just take 3 lines and a picture and put that on social? That's perfectly acceptable for candidates. They don't want more than that. But show them data. There is plenty of data out there on what candidates want to see and what they expect to see. But you can use that.
Who is it you work for, Gemma?
I work for Balfour BT.
So your marketing team generally are used to marketing B2B rather than to individuals, I guess, in the main as well.
Yeah, and they produce some amazing content. It's fantastic. I think it's just, I suppose I'm in a new role, so it's learning what the candidates want to hear about. And as you were saying, maybe it's not always super polished, and it's maybe more of a kind of conversation based. So it's just really to kind of understand kind of how to, as maybe what Simon said, break it down from what they produce into something a bit more kind of digestible.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we're nearly bang on 12 o'clock, so thanks to all the panel. We might be holding some kind of wake tomorrow for Theo when we find out what's actually happened to him. Let's hope he's okay. Gemma, thanks for coming on screen. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your time, and thanks for everybody for coming along. It's been great. Cheers.